Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to try to tackle a topic that I know a lot of you have been wanting to get up to speed on. Ethical business practices in global supply chains.
It's a big one.
Yeah, it is a big one, and there's a lot of programs and acronyms out there.
Right, it's kind of a jungle.
Yeah, it is a jungle. So to make sense of it all, we're going to focus on mainly two key players, SEDEX and SMETA audits. But before we jump into all of that, I think the big question is, what does being an ethical company even mean, like when your operations span the entire globe?
Well, it's a question with growing importance these days. I mean, consumers, they're more and more interested in, where products come from and how they're made.
Yeah, they want to know like the whole story behind the product.
Exactly.
So let's start with SEDEX. What is it and why would a company, want to be a part of it?
So SEDEX stands for Supplier Ethical Data Exchange. And it's basically, think of it like a social media platform for ethical sourcing.
Okay.
It's a nonprofit, and it's where businesses can share information about their suppliers' ethical performance.
Oh, so it's kind of like, if I can make like a comparison, it's like a TripAdvisor for ethical sourcing. Like you can go and check out other companies and see how their suppliers are doing.
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, it's all about transparency, right?
Right.
Companies use it to show they're committed to, doing things the right way, to ethical sourcing, and to kind of learn from each other as well.
Yeah.
It gives them access to like training and resources to improve.
Oh, so there's some tangible benefits to being a part of SEDEX.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do companies actually prove that they're being ethical? I mean, that's where SMETA comes in, right?
Right. So SMETA stands for SEDEX Members Ethical Trade Audit. And it's a way to actually assess a supplier's ethical performance. So think of it like a really deep dive inspection into how a company operates. And there are two main tiers of SMETA audits. There's the 2-pillar and the 4-pillar.
Okay, the 2 pillars and the 4 pillars. It sounds very much like a Greek temple dedicated to ethical sourcing. So tell me a little bit more about these pillars.
Sure. So the 2-pillar audit really focuses on like the essential stuff, labor standards and health and safety. So it's asking questions like, are workers being paid a fair wage? Are there safety protocols in place to prevent accidents? That sort of thing.
So like really basic stuff, making sure that the workers aren't being exploited.
Yeah.
And that there's a safe working environment.
Exactly. And then the 4-pillar audit goes a little bit further. It adds in environmental performance and business ethics. So it's asking questions like, is the company polluting?
Yeah.
Are they, engaging in bribery?
Oh, wow. Okay, so that covers a lot of ground. I mean, if a company gets a good SMETA rating, I mean, that really shows that they're serious about all this stuff.
Absolutely. It's a pretty comprehensive assessment.
Yeah. So, I mean, are there any downsides to these audits? I mean, are they always effective?
That's a good question. I mean, while they're a valuable tool, some argue that they can be a bit burdensome.
Yeah.
Especially for smaller companies that maybe have limited resources. And of course, no audit is completely foolproof, right? I mean, there's always the risk of companies trying to, game the system a little bit.
Yeah, there's always bad apples in every bunch. But overall, it seems like it's a good thing and it kind of pushes companies to do better. But you mentioned that there are other social auditing programs out there besides SEDEX and SMETA.
Yeah, there are a few others. So you have things like SA8000, which is a really widely recognized social accountability standard.
Yeah.
And then WRAP, which focuses on responsible factory production.
Yeah.
And then there's RBA, which is specifically for the electronics industry.
Yeah.
And then BSCI, which is kind of a broader framework for social compliance across various supply chains.
So many acronyms. I mean, it's a whole alphabet soup of ethical auditing out there.
Right.
So, I mean, what are the key differences between all these programs?
Well, I mean, they all aim to improve ethical sourcing ultimately. But they each have their own kind of strengths and target audiences. So, for example, SMETA is known for its flexibility and its 2-tiered approach. While SA8000 is a little bit more prescriptive and it's very globally recognized, BRAP focuses heavily on the factory conditions, whereas RBA is really tailored to like the specific challenges of the electronics industry. And then BSCI provides kind of a broad framework for social compliance.
So a company might choose one program over another, depending on the specific industry they're in and like the level of depth they're looking for.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
This is really interesting. I'm starting to see how complex this whole world of ethical sourcing is. So after a company goes through all this, gets audited, maybe even gets certified, what's in it for them? Is it just a box to check?
Yeah.
Or are there like real tangible benefits?
Oh, there are definitely tangible benefits for companies that are really prioritizing ethical practices.
Okay, tell me more. Like, what are some of the perks? Okay, tell me more. Like, what are some of the perks?
Well, I mean, for starters, a strong commitment to ethical sourcing can really do wonders for a company's reputation. I
Yeah.
mean, think about it. These days, consumers are pretty savvy, they're informed, and they increasingly want to support businesses that share their values.
Right.
So a positive SMETA audit
Yeah.
or a SEDEX certification, it can be a real badge of honor, right?
It's a signal.
Which shows customers that this is a company they can trust.
Yeah, especially in a world where consumers have so many choices. It's like a way for a company to kind of stand out from the crowd and attract those customers who really care about, where their products are coming from.
Exactly. And it's not just about attracting customers either. It's about attracting and retaining talent, right? I mean, employees, especially younger generations, they're increasingly drawn to companies that align with their values.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Just demonstrating a commitment to ethical business practices. I mean, that can be a powerful tool for attracting top-tier talent.
Yeah, so it's not just good for business. It's good for morale and for recruitment. That's a win-win.
Mm.
Um,
Well, then there's the risk management aspect. Like these audits can be like having an early warning system for your supply chain, right? They can help you catch potential problems before they snowball into major issues.
Go.
Imagine a company that unknowingly sources materials from a supplier that's engaged in forced labor or something.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's a PR nightmare just waiting to happen.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of like preventative medicine for your supply chain.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you identify these issues early on, and then you can avoid serious damage to your reputation and obviously your bottom line.
Exactly. And not to mention legal trouble, right? I mean, compliance with laws and regulations is crucial. And audits can really help to ensure that companies are meeting those standards.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just simply avoiding penalties. I mean, SMETA audits often uncover opportunities for companies to become more efficient and sustainable. They might find ways to reduce waste, save energy, or just streamline their processes.
So it's not just about being ethical. It's also about like finding smarter ways to do business.
Exactly. Okay. It can be a real catalyst for innovation and improvement.
I like that.
And they can also be a powerful tool for building trust and transparency, right? By opening up their supply chains to scrutiny, companies can demonstrate accountability to their stakeholders, their customers, their investors, even their own employees.
Yeah, transparency is a big deal these days. And for good reason. People want to know where their products come from and how they're made.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the potential for competitive advantage. In a market where consumers are becoming more and more discerning, having a proven track record of ethical sourcing, that can be a real differentiator.
Oh, for sure.
It allows companies to kind of position themselves as leaders in their industry, attracting customers who really value sustainability and responsible business practices.
So it's not just the quote-unquote right thing to do. It can also be a smart business move.
Exactly. And it's a trend that's only gaining momentum. As consumers become more aware of the impact of their purchasing decisions, companies that prioritize ethical sourcing, they're likely to see a real competitive edge.
So it seems like we're moving towards a world where ethical sourcing is no longer optional. It's just expected.
I think you're right. Consumers are becoming more vocal about their values, and companies are listening. It's a shift that's happening across industries.
That's really encouraging to hear. It feels like we're at a turning point.
Yeah.
Where ethical business practices are becoming the norm rather than the exception. Okay, so let's bring it back to our listener for a second. If you were in their shoes, someone who's learning about all of this for the first time, what would be like your biggest takeaway?
I'd say the key takeaway is that ethical business practices are no longer just a nice to have. They're becoming a fundamental requirement for success in today's marketplace.
I totally agree. It's about building a sustainable business for the long haul, not just chasing short-term profits at the expense of people on the planet.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that a company's actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond its own operations.
Yeah.
Every decision we make as consumers, as business leaders, it has an impact on the world around us.
That's a really powerful thought. It makes you realize that even seemingly small choices can have a big impact in the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and taking responsibility for our actions.
So it's about seeing that bigger picture, understanding that our choices matter, and using our influence to create positive change. So what are some things that listeners can look for when they're shopping to make more informed decisions?
That's a great question. One thing to look for is certifications and labels from reputable organizations like Fair Trade, B Corp, or GOTS, which stands for Global Organic Textile Standard.
Okay.
These certifications indicate that a company has met certain standards for ethical and sustainable practices.
So those labels aren't just marketing fluff, they actually mean something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're a signal that a company has gone through a rigorous process to demonstrate its commitment to ethical sourcing.
Okay, so certifications are one thing to watch out for. What else?
Don't be afraid to do your own research. Check out company websites, read reviews, and see what their policies are on things like labor, environmental impact, and ethical sourcing. Look for companies that are transparent about their supply chains and are actively working to improve their practices.
Yeah, so it takes a little bit of effort, but it's worth it to support businesses that align with your values.
Absolutely. And don't be shy about reaching out to companies directly. Ask them about their supply chains and their commitment to ethical practices.
Yeah.
The more we as consumers demand transparency, the more companies will be held accountable.
Yeah, it's about using our voices as consumers to drive change.
Exactly. And remember, even small changes in our buying habits can add up to make a big difference. By choosing to support companies that prioritize ethical practices,
Right.
we're sending a powerful message that we value people and the planet
Yeah.
as much as we value profit.
I love that. So we've talked about the importance of ethical business practices, the role of social audits, and the power of consumer choices. What's the final takeaway you want to leave our listener with today?
I'd say the final takeaway is this. Ethical business practices are not just a trend. They're the future. Companies that embrace these principles will be the ones that thrive in the long run. And as consumers, we have the power to shape that future with our choices.
I love that. It's a call to action for both businesses and consumers.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more ethical and sustainable world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So to our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the complexities and the importance of ethical business practices in global supply chains. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to learn.
Always.
But before we wrap up, I'd love to get your take on something we haven't explicitly addressed yet.
Sure, I'm all ears.
Okay, cool. So we've talked a lot about what companies should be doing, but
Right.
ultimately it's consumer demand that drives change. So I'm curious, how much weight do you personally place on a company's ethical practices when you're making purchasing decisions?
That's a great question. And it's one that I think every consumer should be asking themselves. It's easy to get caught up in the price, the convenience, the brand name. But for me, knowing that a company operates ethically has become increasingly important. It definitely influences my choices.
I hear that. It's like voting with your wallet in a way.
Exactly.
You're supporting companies that are doing things right.
And it's not always easy. Sometimes it takes a little extra effort to research a company's practices or find ethically sourced alternatives. But for me, it's worth it.
I think a lot of people feel that way. There's a growing awareness that our choices as consumers have an impact, but it can be tough to know where to start. Any advice for our listener on how to make more mindful purchasing decisions?
I'd say start by asking questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to companies directly and inquire about their supply chains, their labor practices, their environmental impact. The more we as consumers demand transparency, the more companies will be held accountable.
It's about using our collective voice to push for positive change.
Absolutely. And remember, every choice matters. Even small changes in our buying habits can add up to make a big difference. By choosing to support companies that prioritize ethical practices, we're sending a powerful message that we value people and the planet as much as we value profit.
Well said. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and sustainable future. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. We hope this has given you a better understanding of the complexities and the importance of ethical business practices in global supply chains.
It's been a pleasure diving into this topic with you.
Likewise. To our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We encourage you to continue exploring this important topic. Remember, every choice you make has an impact, so choose wisely and keep those critical thinking caps on. But before we wrap up, I'd love to get your take on something we haven't explicitly addressed yet.
Sure, I'm all ears.
Okay, cool. So we've talked a lot about what companies should be doing, but ultimately it's consumer demand that drives change. So I'm curious, how much weight do you personally place on a company's ethical practices when you're making purchasing decisions?
That's a great question, and it's one that I think every consumer should be asking themselves.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the price, the convenience, the brand name, but for me, knowing that a company operates ethically has become increasingly important. Yeah, it influences my choices, definitely.
Yeah, it's like voting with your wallet in a way.
Exactly.
You're supporting the companies that are doing things right.
Yeah, and it's not always easy. Sometimes it takes a little extra effort to research a company's practices or to find ethically sourced alternatives. But for me, it's worth it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people feel that way. There's a growing awareness that our choices as consumers have an impact, but it can be tough to know where to start. Do you have any advice for our listener on how to make more mindful purchasing decisions?
I'd say start by asking questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to companies directly and inquire about their supply chains, their labor practices, their environmental impact. The more we as consumers demand transparency, the more companies will be held accountable.
Yeah, it's about using our collective voice to push for positive change.
Absolutely. And remember, every choice matters. Even small changes in our buying habits can add up to make a big difference. By choosing to support companies that prioritize ethical practices, we're sending a powerful message that we value people and the planet as much as we value profit.
Well said. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and sustainable future. On that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. We hope this is giving you a better understanding of the complexities and the importance of ethical business practices in global supply chains.
It's been a pleasure diving into this topic with you.
Likewise, to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey, and we encourage you to continue exploring this important topic. Remember, every choice you make has an impact, so choose wisely and keep those critical thinking caps on.